Imagine a time when film had no sound, no color, only flickering black and white images. Yet even then, over a century ago, filmmakers dared to bring the story of Jesus to life. The year was 1912. The world was still reeling from industrial revolutions, and the cinema was a novelty. Yet in the British film From the Manger to the Cross, actor Robert Henderson Bland became one of the first men ever to portray Jesus on screen. Shot in the actual landscapes of the Holy Land, the film shocked viewers with its dedication to realism, especially given the technical limits of the time. It set a precedent that the life of Jesus wasn't just sacred, it was cinematic. By 1927, that bold experiment became spectacle. Director Cecil B. DeMille, famous for grand biblical epics, cast the seasoned actor H.B. Warner in King of Kings. At over 50 years old, Warner brought gravitas and solemnity. He didn't smile easily. He walked slowly. His Jesus radiated silent authority. Though the film was silent, its emotional impact thundered. Audiences were moved by the scale, the thousands of extras, the lavish sets, and by the way Jesus was presented, majestic, unwavering, and distant, like a living icon. But as decades passed, the question evolved. Could Jesus be more than an untouchable figure? Could he also be relatable? In 1959, a partial answer came, though Jesus wasn't even the star. Ben-Hur, one of the most awarded films in history, showed only glimpses of Christ, portrayed by Claude Heder. We never clearly saw his face, and yet, his presence shaped the entire narrative. By hiding him, the film heightened his mystery, evoking the divine without reducing it to performance. It's an approach that still inspires directors today. Less can say more. Then came the 1960s, a golden era for biblical cinema. It was a time of grandeur, orchestras, vast desert sets, and booming dialogue. Into this came Jeffrey Hunter's Jesus in the 1961 King of Kings. He was young, striking, with piercing blue eyes and delicate features. A visual that some critics mocked as too pretty to be the Son of God. But others saw something deeper. Hunter's performance balanced gentleness and resolve. His soft voice didn't weaken his presence. It made him more compassionate, more human. And that duality, the divine wrapped in human tenderness, became a cornerstone for many future portrayals. Then in 1965, the stakes were raised. The greatest story ever told, directed by George Stevens, was a massive Hollywood undertaking. Max von Sydow, a towering Swedish actor, stepped into the role of Christ. His performance? Quiet, almost too quiet. Von Sydow's Jesus was deeply introspective, contemplative to the point of being enigmatic. He didn't weep or rage. He looked beyond. His eyes were always elsewhere, as if peering into eternity. While the film itself was criticized for being slow and packed with too many celebrity cameos, yes, John Wayne appears as a Roman centurion, von Sydow left a lasting impression. A messiah above human emotion, grounded in celestial stillness. But this also posed a problem. By the mid-60s, the Jesus on screen was often distant, silent, and too perfect to touch. Something was missing. Audiences were ready for something new. The calm, ethereal depictions of Jesus from the mid-20th century paved the way for a bold departure in the 1970s. A generation disillusioned by war, civil unrest, and spiritual searching no longer connected with the distant, haloed Christ of older films. They wanted someone real, someone who felt as confused, passionate, and raw as they did. Enter 1973. Jesus Christ Superstar exploded onto the scene like a rock concert in the middle of Sunday Mass. Based on the musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice, this film was anything but traditional. Jesus, portrayed by Ted Neely, sang his inner anguish. He danced. He doubted. He cried out in agony, not just on the cross, but in confusion and frustration long before it. For the first time, a mainstream Jesus looked overwhelmed. This Jesus wasn't stoic or mysterious. He was human, insecure, tired of being misunderstood. The film ruffled feathers. Some called it irreverent, even blasphemous. But it struck a deep chord with young audiences. They saw in Neely's performance not just a messiah, but a man burdened by impossible expectations. The soundtrack became iconic. The film became a cult classic, and it paved the way for something else. The idea that Jesus could be portrayed not just as divine perfection, but as a character wrestling with his own destiny. This idea reached its emotional peak in 1977 with Franco Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth. This 6-hour miniseries aired on British television and became a staple around the world. In it, Robert Powell took on the role with unforgettable gravity. With icy blue eyes, a calm voice, and a deeply meditative presence, Powell's Jesus became the definitive Christ for millions. He hardly blinked in some scenes, giving him an otherworldly aura. But this was no remote deity. Powell's portrayal carried a sense of heartbreak, of a man deeply feeling the sorrow of the world. For many, Powell's performance captured the perfect balance. Not too human, not too divine, just enough mystery to make you believe, but enough warmth to make you care. Then in 1979 came Jesus, a low-budget film with a high spiritual purpose. Brian Deacon's performance was not intended to dazzle, but to educate. Based directly on the Gospel of Luke, this film became the most widely distributed Jesus movie in history, translated into over 1,000 languages and shown in every corner of the globe. It was used by missionaries, churches, and evangelists as a teaching tool. While it lacked the visual flair of Hollywood, its simplicity was its strength. This was a Jesus for everyone, not just a character, but a message. As the 1980s and 90s unfolded, filmmakers continued to wrestle with how to portray the man behind the miracles. In 1980, Chris Sarandon starred in The Day Christ Died, a TV movie focusing entirely on the final 24 hours before the crucifixion. It emphasized physical pain, emotional turmoil, and human fear. It was raw, less holy glow, more human blood. And that became a theme, showing Jesus not just as the Savior, but as the sufferer. This theme would reach its most controversial form in 1988 with Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ. Willem Dafoe portrayed a Jesus plagued by inner torment. He was unsure of his mission. He desired love. He doubted. And yes, the film imagined a what-if scenario. What if Jesus had come down from the cross, lived a normal life, and abandoned his mission? The backlash was fierce. Protests erupted. Some countries banned the film outright, but critics saw something else. A bold meditation on free will, temptation, and sacrifice. Scorsese wasn't mocking Christ. He was trying to understand him, not just through scripture, but through the human condition. As the 90s drew to a close, one final portrayal stood out. Jeremy Sisto in the 1999 miniseries Jesus. This version shocked viewers, not because it was controversial, but because it was joyful. Sisto's Jesus smiled. He played with children. He laughed, danced, and joked. Some called it unserious. Others saw something radical, a Messiah who was deeply present, not just a symbol of suffering, but a living man of love. This was the Jesus who held hands, who wept for his friends, who rejoiced in creation, and it worked. Viewers across generations connected with this warmth. It suggested that holiness didn't have to be solemn, it could be joyful too. By the early 2000s, filmmakers had stretched the image of Jesus in nearly every direction. Divine, human, mysterious, relatable. But in 2004, one film would shock the world and shift the paradigm again. Not by softening the story, but by showing its full, brutal cost. Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a movie, it was an ordeal. Actor Jim Caviezel gave a harrowing performance, enduring physically what few actors ever would. Whipped, bloodied, dragged through dirt and stone, Caviezel's Jesus suffered for 2 hours on screen, depicting the final 12 hours of Jesus' life with almost unbearable realism. The film was shot in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew. It avoided English altogether, seeking historical accuracy and emotional immersion. And it paid off, at the box office and in cultural impact. With over $600 million in earnings, it became one of the most successful religious films ever made. But more importantly, it made suffering impossible to look away from. For millions of viewers, the crucifixion wasn't a symbol anymore. It was a lived experience, one that stayed with them long after the credits rolled. By the time The Passion of the Christ left audiences trembling in 2004, it had done something unprecedented. It stripped away centuries of sanitization. The story of Jesus was no longer something to admire from a safe distance. It was something to feel, deep in your bones. But it was only the beginning. The years that followed would reveal a new desire. People didn't just want to witness Jesus' suffering, they wanted to walk with him. In 2013, that invitation arrived in the form of a TV miniseries, The Bible, produced by Mark Burnett and Roma Downey. Its tone was modern, its editing was fast-paced, and its storytelling aimed at a generation raised on smartphones and short attention spans. Yet its message remained ancient. Enter Portuguese actor Diogo Morgado. His portrayal of Jesus was warm, approachable, and magnetic. He smiled easily. He looked his followers in the eyes. His voice radiated hope. Morgado didn't perform miracles with drama, he performed them with love. That gentle presence resonated, particularly in Latin America, Spain, and the US. So powerful was the response that in 2014, they released Son of God, a theatrical adaptation built from the miniseries. Morgado reprised his role, this time with more focus and emotional range. His Jesus was one who rejoiced with his friends and wept for the world. It was a Jesus who hugged people, who laughed at children's jokes, who made the divine feel human again. This shift toward a more accessible Jesus continued in 2016 with the film Risen. But this time, the lens flipped. Rather than tell the story from the disciples' eyes, Risen followed a Roman centurion named Caviezel, tasked with investigating Jesus' missing body. Through his skeptical eyes, we rediscover the story of the resurrection, not as a doctrine, but as a mystery that transformed hearts. Jesus, portrayed by Cliff Curtis, barely spoke. He didn't need to. His stillness, his gaze, his simple presence on screen carried a quiet authority. Where the Passion screamed of agony, Risen whispered of peace, and that whisper was just as powerful. In those brief moments, viewers saw a Jesus who could change lives not just through words, but through presence. Curtis's serene portrayal left many reflecting. Sometimes the greatest miracles are the ones that transform us internally. And then came 2019. At first, it looked like just another crowdfunded project. No major studio, no Hollywood stars, just a small team, a modest budget, and a vision that felt deeply personal. It was called The Chosen. Created by Dallas Jenkins, this series quickly became a phenomenon, not because it had flashy effects or massive sets, but because it did something most films hadn't dared. It built a relationship between Jesus and the viewer. Jonathan Roumie, the actor behind this Jesus, brought something radical: gentleness. His Jesus joked. He danced at weddings. He shared quiet moments with fishermen. He embraced the awkwardness of friendship, the weight of leadership, and the intimacy of compassion. Gone was the distant, unreachable deity. This Jesus made breakfast for his disciples. He wept with Mary. He challenged people with love, not judgment. And he looked at every soul, every viewer, with eyes that said, "I see you, I know you." What made The Chosen so impactful wasn't just the performance, it was the accessibility. It was streamed online, free for anyone to watch. It was translated into dozens of languages. It was funded by ordinary people from all over the world who believed this story mattered. And it did. Each episode of The Chosen felt less like a reenactment and more like a personal encounter. It reminded us that Jesus didn't just come for sermons, he came for conversations. He came to sit at tables, to laugh, to listen, to be with us. By 2023, biblical storytelling had entered a renaissance. In His Only Son, a film focused on the life of Abraham, Jesus barely appeared. And yet in one powerful scene, the connection between the Old and New Testaments became breathtakingly clear. Jesus was shown as the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, a subtle, poignant reminder that the entire biblical narrative is woven together by divine intention. It was a passing moment, but it stuck. And then came 2025. Animated films are often reserved for fairy tales or fantasy. But this year, something changed. Rey de Reyes, King of Kings, an ambitious animated production by Angel Studios, redefined what religious cinema could be. Voiced by the acclaimed Oscar Isaac, This animated Jesus carried a new kind of power, not in realism, but in storytelling. The animation allowed creators to explore miracles with visual beauty, to paint parables in vivid color, and to reach children and adults alike through wonder. And it worked. Released on April 11, 2025, Rey de Reyes broke records. It earned $19 million its opening weekend and over $68 million in total, making it the most successful animated biblical film ever made. But beyond the numbers, it did something more important. It proved that Jesus' story wasn't fading. It was adapting. It was thriving. In the age of streaming, social media, and ever-shortening attention spans, his presence remained undeniable. From silent films in 1912 to global crowdfunding in 2025, Jesus has worn many faces on screen. He has been solemn and smiling, divine and doubting, mysterious and intimate, sometimes veiled in shadows, sometimes bathed in blood, sometimes dancing in joy. But through it all, the message hasn't changed. These portrayals reflect not just changing cinema, but changing hearts. Each generation finds its own Jesus, one who speaks their language, shares their pain, and calls them forward. In the end, Jesus isn't bound to film. He's not limited to language, tone, or actor. The screen may change, the faces may differ, but the call remains the same: come and see.